Everyone, and welcome. Welcome to September. I'm Noor Kokiar, the Executive Director of the Washington State China Relations Council. Thank you for joining with us today, where our distinguished speaker, Malcolm Riddell, will share his thoughts on some recent developments in China, particularly those in the tech sector. Malcolm has studied many of the writings and speeches of Xi Jinping, and I believe he's going to tell us that we should not have been surprised by many of the new policies that have been rolled out by the party. For those of us who follow China, our heads are spinning these days with all the changes that have been recently introduced. For example, only days after the Chinese company Didi listed in New York, the government imposed penalties on that company and others in the tech sector by finalizing new data security laws. Next, the after-school education sector was swiftly dismantled. On another front, Xi Jinping's promotion of common prosperity has created a sense of fear among the wealthier members of Chinese society and prompted a rash of donations by most notably tech industry titans. The government's also recently cracked down on the entertainment industry, imposing tax penalties on a number of celebrities while banning or actually disappearing a number of others. And to top it off, the government has done something that would strike fear into the heart of any 14-year-old boy. The party has declared a limit on the amount of time that youngsters can spend on video games. So there's really a lot to unpack here. Hopefully Malcolm is going to help us understand these developments and maybe give us a glimpse of the future. Before we start, let me briefly introduce you to the Washington State China Relations Council. Our organization was founded in 1979 as the oldest state-level organization of its kind. Our mission is to improve the bilateral relationship between Washington State and China, specifically in the areas of business, government, culture, and education. Since the onset of the pandemic, we focused most of our efforts on producing China-related webinars. We'd encourage today's participants to look at our website, which is very simple. It's wscrc.org, where you can see our upcoming events, as well as to view many of our past programs on our YouTube channel. Please do contact us if you'd like to be added to our mailing list. The Council also has a sister organization, the Washington State China Relations Fund. This is a charitable organization that produces our educational and community programs. A contribution to this organization will help us continue our efforts to educate and inform our leaders and the general public about the benefits and the long-term importance of a healthy US-China relationship. And now, let me introduce our speaker and our moderator. Malcolm Riddell has a distinguished bio. He's participated in China affairs for more than 40 years as an investment banker, diplomat, lawyer, Harvard academic, and CIA case officer. For 20 of those years, he lived and worked in East Asia. Malcolm served at multiple government agencies, including as a CIA case officer in the China Operations and Special Operations Group, as a US delegate to the UN, and as Florida's Undersecretary of State for International Affairs. Malcolm is also a lawyer, board certified in international law. Since 1988, Malcolm has started a number of businesses, including a China-focused investment bank called Riddell Seng, and China Debate, an online analysis and event platform that informs on issues of investment in China and international economies and markets that feel China's impact. Malcolm is an associate in research at the Harvard Fairbanks Center for Chinese Studies, a former Asia Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, and a former academic leader and instructor at the Harvard Design School. He was also a senior visiting fellow at Peking University. Malcolm holds an MBA from Harvard Business School, a Master's of International Affairs from Columbia University, and a JD from Stetson University College of Law. And we're very pleased that Malcolm could join us today. And moderating today's session is Dr. Spencer Cohen, who's the principal and founder of High Peak Strategy, an international trade and economics research consulting firm that's based in Seattle. He consults and writes extensively on international trade, China's economy, industry clusters, and regional economic analysis. Prior to forming High Peak Strategy, he served as a senior economist with the Seattle economics consulting firm. He also held policy and research roles with the state of Washington. Spencer was recently selected to the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations Public International Intellectuals Program. So congratulations, Spencer, for that. He's also a senior fellow with the Infinite Sum Modeling, an economics modeling and research firm whose clients include the World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, and various national governments. And beginning this fall, he will also become an affiliate professor in the Department of Geography at the University of Washington. Dr. Cohen has a PhD in economic geography from UW, an MA in Chinese studies, also from the University of Washington, and a BA in mathematics and history from the University of Connecticut. So now with our formal introduction over, Malcolm, I'd like to turn it over to you. I think you're going to start with a PowerPoint, and please explain to us what's going on in China.
All right, well, let me go ahead and share my screen. Let me get to where I have to get to. There we go. And here we are. Let me put it onto slideshow. Bingo. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending, and thank so much for the invitation to speak. I realized after I agreed on the topic and had also agreed to say 15 minutes to speak on it, I had bitten off much more than I could chew. So this is going to be woefully inadequate so far as details. But what I'd like to do in these few minutes we have is to go over quickly what has been our focus really in the news and in some analysis, which is what's been happening in the tech sector. And then I'd like to situate it in the broader context. If we had more time, I'd go over the different policy implications of each one of these actions, because they're many and they're varied, and they go really to several different needs. But what I really want to get to is what Xi Jinping is really up to here. And the reason I think it's important today is that it seems to be changing. We're entering a new phase here. And while it's more like a vibe than anything that I've got as a concrete idea, I think you'll see that what I'm getting at is that basically we need to pay attention to what Xi Jinping is saying, because he actually, if you go back to his early writings and his speeches throughout his time in office here, he pretty much at one point or another gets done what it says he wants to get done. And I think if we had been paying more attention, probably we wouldn't have such a shocking time with the so-called tech crackdown. So let me quickly go through this. And again, I apologize for how sketchy this is going to be. It's a big subject and we could spend a great deal of time. And I look forward to fleshing it out in the Q&A. All right. What we have here, oops, okay. There we go. What we have here is the cover of The Economist from just a week or so ago. China's attack on tech. Now, the thing we have to ask ourselves, first of all, is this whole idea of attack and crackdown, is that a Western perspective or is that the Chinese perspective? Are the regulators looking at this as an attack on tech, or they're looking at it as regulating a sector that they think needs action for a number of policy goals? So I think the first error we make is just in the way we characterize what's happening in China. And we saw that by being caught off guard, that the Western investors and Chinese and other investors lost, $1 trillion or so. We just look at this, what's happened. I think it's just fascinating from its peak in February, just straight down. Now, the big question is, why is China killing the goose that laid the golden egg, to quote so many articles that have begun that way? And then here's one of my favorites. One way when this first started happening, before the analysis came out, I watched a lot of CNBC and Bloomberg interviews, and here's Steve Ratner saying, I don't think anybody saw any of this coming. And I say, okay, Steve, you didn't see it coming, huh? Now let's go quickly through what has been happening and why we should have seen it coming. I'm sure any of you who have been following this remember that a year ago or so, the Ant Financial was going to do an IPO, the largest in history, in Hong Kong. in New York, $34 billion. And before it was launched, it was polled, and according to reporting in the Wall Street Journal, at Xi Jinping's behest. Now, one of the things I wrote as this was coming out, is this was like watching the Akira Kurosawa movie Rashomon. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's where you have one event that has several witnesses and different points of view. We've got from this was because Jack Ma gave a speech, what was called the most expensive speech in history, criticizing the regulators. It's because the Xi Jinping got upset because his political adversaries were going to benefit from this as they were part of the IPO, and it went on and on. But when you get down to it, there was some pretty good reasoning in the Alipay, which was the big platform of Ant, and that is they were giving microloans and essentially going into banking that was outside of the regulation. And at the same time, they were racking up, having young people and others rack up huge debts, which was creating concern overall for financial instability. So we began to see that. But here's what amazed me. You notice here's where it happened, and it's still been going up. And but even after this, even after we saw that the regulations were coming, it continued to peak. Then we see the antitrust rules that came out. Well, people didn't know what those were, so it continued going up, and it didn't really start going down until the antitrust rules into fintech were being put into place. And then the next big event, and the one that got everybody, finally woke Western investors up, as Norm mentioned, was the didnt IPO. Didi had been warned by regulators that its platform did not have sufficient data security especially from its mapping. Didi is a ride sharing service, and so after the IPO, before trading began on Friday, the regulators announced an investigation and pulled Didi's app from stores. So next thing you know, people woke up and Didi's stock dropped like a rock. Then we see Meituan, which is a food delivery service, huge. And then an antitrust investigation was opened on Meituan. I got my numbers wrong here. Meituan. And there was, again, we could do an hour on any one of these, but the main point was that they were apparently engaging in anti-monopoly practices. But even more than that, they weren't paying their workers very well. And even one Chinese official, in sort of like one of those reality TV shows, became a Meituan food delivery guy and was able to report on how bad the working conditions were and how little he got paid. And so things keep falling. And then next thing you know, as Norm mentioned, we have the regulations on the private education sector. It too dropped like a rock, because what did the regulators say? They said, well, by the way, you're now a nonprofit. Okay, well, that's certainly not something that stock investors are looking for. And the second thing was that they were not able to, oh my goodness, second one, I'm not slipping my mind right now. But in any case, this caused, again, it to drop. And next thing you know, we've had this incredible loss of value. And why is it happening now? Well, one of the things that we see in the West is that when there's a new industry, the regulators put a structure in place, or the legislators put a regulatory structure in place, and then it sort of works out. In China, it's the opposite. In China, the entrepreneurs, they sort of give it the go ahead, let them give it a try, and just see how it works, and then figure out how to regulate it. And so if we're looking strictly from a regulatory rather than a policy point of view, we're seeing kind of a standard operating procedure. And Tony Sage at the Harvard Kennedy School several years ago told me something that I didn't think much of until all this started to happen. And what he said was the party outsources what it can't do to the private sector. And after it succeeds, the party reels them in. And to a certain extent, that may be what we're seeing here. And that is that the party really didn't have the ability to develop the e-commerce sector. So it let the Jack Ma's of the world sort of go out and do it. And now they've succeeded. Now it's time for them to get control. But oops, sorry. And then when it comes to investors and why all this happened and how we should look at it, I think we come at this the wrong way. The Financial Times said the question is whether the Chinese government simply doesn't care about appetites to invest and doesn't want international finance. And it's trying to dissuade companies from listing overseas. Well, these are the wrong questions. The right question is different. And in Bloomberg, they said, does Beijing care how much money you lose? No. Does it care if you what does it get the access to the great pool of global capital? The short answer is no, the government doesn't care. It's pursuing other goals. And it's this point that I want to make, that we so often, whether it's in government to government policy or US-China policy or any of these other things or investments, we tend to look at everything from our point of view, and we get blindsided by not seeing the Chinese point of view. So if we see what's happening here, we see that there are goals that China's trying to take some action on with this so-called crackdown. And they want to rein in these tech titans. They want to get the billionaires to realize they've got to conform to the party. They're trying to do social equality. That's a tough one in one of the most unequal countries in the world. And they're trying to get the cost of living in cities not so high. That means that if you don't have to send your kids to, or you aren't really able to send your kids to these tutoring schools where the rich already have an unfair advantage, and the middle class are paying up to 30% of their income on, then they're not going to have children. Same thing if housing prices are too high. So we're talking about tech here, but you'll begin to see the property sector having the same thing. But these, again, if you peel back the onion, these are serving bigger goals of stability. And we see this through channels like banking and the antitrust regulation, the data security, and the social equality that's being put forward. But my point today, and this is what I really wanted to get to, is what I'm seeing, and again, subject to confirmation, we're in early stages, but I think Xi Jinping is reshaping the Chinese economy and the party's social contract with the Chinese people. And when you begin to see it, when you begin to start from that point of view and work down, so many of these policies that to Western investors, they either didn't see it coming, or they thought, why in the world is China doing this? It's hurting its economy so much. And not to mention they're costing us a lot of money. But if we begin to see things from Xi Jinping's perspective and the Chinese perspective, and begin to see what the overriding goals are, then I think it makes a little more sense. Now, Liz Economy at the Council on Foreign Relations has posited that China has had 3 revolutions since the founding of the PRC. The first was Mao, where he attempted to have a complete state-run economy and society. The second was Deng, where we saw the introduction of capitalist activities and a more openness to the outside world. And then we have Xi's third revolution. And that's the one I want to focus on. And some of the highlights are his putting the party in control. We saw that with his anti-corruption campaign, which had the twofer of getting rid of corrupt officials and winning the favor of the people, but also in giving him a chance to either get rid of his enemies or scare any potential enemies. We've seen the greater ascension of the state over the private. We've seen his efforts to become more self-sufficient in the wake of a difficult international environment, especially with the U.S. under the Trump administration, and also an economy where productivity is declining through a number of issues. And with that, we've seen two big economic policies, dual circulation and made in China. We've seen the Belt and Road initiatives, we've seen the Wolf Warriors, we've seen the tension. He's reshaped the way China does things. If you compare it just to whether it's Mao or Deng or Jiang Zemin or Hu Jintao, this is a whole different ball game. And we've seen the Made in China effort. He believes that technology is going to be the thing that gets China out of the middle income trap, which is again a whole issue in itself. But it also brings to bear the question of the technology, so-called technology crackdown that we're seeing now, and that is many commentators distinguish between soft tech and hard tech. Soft tech is what we're seeing now with the ride sharing and WeChat and fintech. And these are all nice to have, but they direct talent and resources to industries that are not core to Xi Jinping's vision of how he wants the economy. He is more interested in hard tech, as we say, and whether that's in semiconductors, where, as we see, China is very vulnerable, or into AI kinds of things, or just virtually any of these things, where it's become clear now that Xi Jinping wants this. And he also, unlike so many countries in the West, does not want to, quote unquote, deindustrialize. He wants China to be in industrial power. And for what it's worth, I've said and written for as long as I can remember now that, big important countries need to make stuff. And so we're starting to catch on to that here in this country again. But Xi Jinping is definitely, it is there, and it is behind one of the motives behind what we're seeing. I don't believe that the attempt is to kill this soft tech industry, but it is to make it clear what the priorities need to be for resources and talent, and that those need to be directed into the things that will make China great and strong and more prosperous. The other thing we've seen is the dual circulation strategy, which is way more than we can go into here. But the basic idea is that you need to increase on the China side of the dual circulation strategy, you have to have more consumption. Okay, to have more consumption, you need more money. How do you get more money? You give the masses more money. The billionaires aren't going to be spending a lot at the local noodle shop. But if you give a Meituan food delivery guy a decent living wage, he's going to spend more. So you can see where these policies go. And then on the international side, we know that Xi still wants to keep trade and these sorts of things going, but to become self-sufficient in key industries. And again, more than we can talk about here. This is one of my favorite quotes that I read. Wall Street gets a Chinese education. This is from the Wall Street Journal. And I'm just going to read the whole thing because it's so good. The big surprise from the slump in Chinese company stocks, and remember, we had Ratner at the beginning say, I don't think anybody saw this coming, is that people are claiming to be surprised. President Xi Jinping has made plain for years that he intends to bring even greater swaths of Chinese private economy under state's control. Guess what, Wall Street? He meant it. I thought this was terrific, except it does not go far enough. And as we'll see, I think that Xi means it, but he means it in a way that it is going to be reshaping things throughout. So what do? We want to get into Xi Jinping's head. So if he wants more than just controlling the private sector, what's he want? Okay, if we get into his head, the first thing we have to do is look at things from his perspective, not from our perspective or from Wall Street's perspective. And the second, as I said at the beginning, is take him at his word, because if you look back over what he's said and written over not just his term, but even before, he's implementing the things that he believes in. So what is this? Just to give a quick outline, he's got the China dream from the very beginning, from the time he took office. And he says we have to work tirelessly to realize the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. And it's been the greatest dream of the Chinese people. But notice that if you recall that Mao wanted to eliminate effectively traditional Chinese culture and thought and replace it with his own thought, good Mao Zedong thought. But Xi Jinping makes clear that China has a history of 5,000 years, a splendid civilization, remarkable contributions, one of the great nations. And this is important in what we're going to talk about coming up. So this takes me to another point where I particularly liked, again, are looking at things from our point of view and not their point of view. And this is global investors are shocked to have discovered China is run by communists. Now that was not meant to be an ironic line, really. It sounds like something out of Borowitz if you read the New Yorker. But let's unpack that a little bit. If we take Mao at his word, we're talking about socialism with Chinese characteristics, right? He says he's a Marxist. So let's believe him on the socialism part. So what does this sort of mean? Well, forgive me for not having a better, I couldn't find anything better, believe it or not. But if we look at just one aspect of this, that's Marxist stages of history. We go from the feudal stage where we could say that to a great extent, Mao felt that China was at the time of the revolution, to the capitalist stage, to the socialist stage, to the communist society. We know with the great leap forward that Mao said, well, we're going to just leapfrog all this and go to socialist society or to communist society. Well, how'd that work out for him? Not so well. So we had to retrench. And we got to Xi Jinping, pardon me, to Deng Xiaoping. And, here's Deng, black cat, white cat. If it catches the mouse, it's a good cat. And in introducing all these capitalist and market economy things, open to globalization, to exports, to trade, and these sorts of things. And as a result of this, we have told ourselves a story. And that story is essentially that, yeah, these guys say they're communists. Yeah. But come on, they're capitalists. Just look at the way they operate. And they're sure not going to kill something that's going as well as capitalism, are they? And suddenly we're starting to get those doubts as we see it with the so-called crackdown in tech, that maybe there's something else going on here besides making a lot of money. And oops, sorry, went back too far. And what I'm going to suggest here is this, that Deng Xiaoping never stopped believing in those stages of history. And I've gone back and read the theorists who tied themselves in knots to explain why Deng's use of capitalist tools made sense in a Marxist and socialist context. But what I'm going to posit is that Deng never lost sight of the goal. That is the goal of socialism. He believed in socialism. He did not become a capitalist. He did not intend for China to become a capitalist country. And he saw, as she has said and others, poverty is not socialism. Socialism is not poverty. And so he used the tools at hand to make China strong. But it was not meant to be a permanent condition. And I think what we're seeing with Xi Jinping is that capitalism is sort of getting by its use by date, that he may be making the move to that next stage. And he said it himself, to the primary socialist society. So they've not abandoned the capitalist stage, but we're going to see more and more emphasis on moving toward this goal of a socialist society. And in the process, there are going to be all sorts of moves. They're inexplicable to those of us who believe that, yeah, they're really capitalists. They're just getting lip service to communism and socialism. No, I think what we're seeing now is that this is the real thing. But there's another aspect to this that I wanted to bring up, and that is the Chinese characteristics part of this. Now, when the Economist made this cover, the idea was, and they're talking about China. This is in 2013, talking about the China dream. And it's a little bit ironic, that Xi sees himself as the emperor, and he's going to, he's going to be the strong man. He's got a lot of these ideas, but he's really just, another one of these guys at heart. I'm taking a different view. And my view, again, it's a vibe, and you can watch for it. But everything I've read of what Xi Jinping has had to say about his views on political philosophy as influenced by Chinese political philosophy is that he very much believes in the role of imperial excellence. And just to give a couple of characteristics of that, an emperor works tirelessly for good of the people, not for himself. He emphasizes this all the time in his speeches, that the party's working for this. Now, remember my old Cold War Soviet mentality. I said, yeah, you're working for the good of the people. What you're doing is working for make the party strong, and you just want to be a strong man, Xi Jinping. I'm not so sure now. I think he would like to go down not just as greater than Mao and Deng, but as one of the great leaders who fulfilled what has been this concept of dynastic excellence, even though it's not in even an imperial context. Another thing that is part of the ideal of this sort is an incorruptible bureaucracy. And an incorruptible bureaucracy is just what the anti-corruption campaign was after. We looked at it cynically, that it was just simply a way to get the Chinese people to buy back into the party and to get rid of Xi's enemies. But I'm beginning to get the vibe that he may have really meant it, that he wants an incorruptible bureaucracy. And he also wants a virtuous, obedient citizenry. So we look at the social credit system that's in place, and where everybody's tracked and gets scores. And if you don't, if you run afoul of that system, you can't buy a plane ticket, you can't get a loan. You're punished if you aren't a good citizen. And if you can't make them virtuous in the Confucian way from the inside out, go more toward the legalist way and make them good from the outside in. But at the same time, he's emphasizing development of personal cultivation as well. But back onto the virtuous society, teenagers in a virtuous society, a virtuous citizenry, are not playing video games. They're out doing something productive for the good of the people or for their family. And these are the kinds of things that I think we're going to see all through and through. And so we have to keep an eye on this. Now, I'm not claiming that any of this is I think I'm ready to stand behind 100%. But it is so striking to read his words that he's made good on in so many areas to realize his vision, and then to see this next part of the vision coming into play, that I'm starting to believe that there may be something here. So let's look at what we mentioned earlier, common prosperity, and we'll use this as a shorthand just for the overall project that Xi's vision has for this reshaping of the economy and for redoing the social contract between the party and the people. We know that Deng Xiaoping, as we just said he believed in socialism. That's why I'm positing that he did not switch it to become a capitalist. He used capitalism as a tool. So he said, okay, we're going to make a small number of people rich first. But this whole to get rich is glorious has created a huge wealth gap, and all sorts of potential trouble. If we look at it from just a hard political power point of view, the people are unhappy. And if we look at it from from our socialism with Chinese characteristics point of view, we're certainly not getting anywhere close to socialism if we have a huge, the largest number of billionaires, I guess, in the world, and a whole bunch of people who are living on just a few dollars a day. So this needs to be taken care of. But the point of Deng is that if he still believed in socialism, this was meant to be a transitional stage. And so we had to move out of it at some point, once China was strong enough to resist its enemies and to feed and clothe and house its people. And what I'm believing now is that transition period could be ending. So in the same way I said that capitalism may be sort of Xi is making the transition from capitalism to to more of a socialist economy and society, I think we could say the same basic thing of what we think of as Deng Xiaoping style capitalism. And one of the things you can't see it all here, but if you go back to listen to what she has to say, you can see that he's been talking about common prosperity a little bit. You can't see the end of the slide because there's people. Let me see if I can get rid of it. There we go. And he's talking about it a few times, and then suddenly in 220 it starts to go way up. 221 so far, the mentions are great. I remember seeing it in the speech I noticed particularly in his speech on the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. I said, I wonder just what's going on with this. And now we're beginning to see. So if we go back to our tech crackdown, we can see that this is the kind of thing that's motivating the crackdown on private tutoring, because it gives an unfair advantage to the wealthy for their kids to go through the examination hell to get in the best colleges. If we see that the antitrust fines on internet firms, where those firms are taking advantage of their monopoly positions, which they were permitted to have, but no longer is that monopoly position in the best interest of the people because it's getting lots of people rich. We see these new guidelines in the treatment of gig workers, in like Meituan and the wanting to give them better, and many other companies like Meituan, give them better working conditions and a living wage. And we also see and this is outside our tech area, but we see a property tax coming in. We see all sorts of things that are trying to reduce the cost of living in cities so that people will be able to much more easily afford a home and be able to accomplish another goal, which is to turn around the depopulation that seems to be taking place. And an interesting point just there is that bachelors in the middle class generally aren't eligible candidates for marriage until they have a piece of property. And sometimes the whole family pitches in to get them an apartment so that they can find a way to get married. This isn't sustainable. And as we mentioned before, we're seeing this very interesting. And I remember seeing when it first came out, and I kind of rolled my eyes at it, where all these tech billionaires and others are making these huge charitable donations. I mean, billions of dollars, and companies are making these huge billions of dollars of donations to try to keep in good with the party. And so if we look at this overall, we can see that there's a whole attempt here to make it clear to every sector of the economy that what you need to do is you need to line up with the party goals, not with lining your own pockets. And the party's goals are moving, which is, of course, makes it difficult for those who are trying to stay in good stead with the party. But the way it's moving is toward common prosperity, and the idea that there's going to be a lot more, that you've all had a chance to get rich. Now it's time we give a lot of opportunity to the rest of the country. And with that, I will stop and go to question and answers. Oops. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Malcolm. I was just about to step in and say it's about time to go to Q&A. So perfect timing. I think you gave us a great explanation or your interpretation of what's going on. So now I'd like to turn to Spencer to ask a couple of questions. And then for the audience, please put your questions in the chat box and we'll try and get to them. And we can we'll run about 10 minutes longer than the hour. So we'll go till 10 after 5.
Yes, I apologize for going over.
Well, it was a fascinating presentation, so we enjoyed it. Okay, Spencer, all yours.
Well, firstly, Malcolm, thank you for such a fascinating explanation for us. I thought that your invoking of Chinese characteristics was a really unique and largely underspoken, understated element to explaining Xi Jinping's policies. There are also a couple of things that struck with me. Certainly the as you pointed out, the shock that China is run by communists. I think a lot of people kind of somehow forgot that it's still run by a one-party Marxist-Leninist regime. And then also that the idea of experimentation, which has been a common theme in China's growth model going back to the opening of reform. And the most recent example of it being, as you said, with respect to the tech sector and entrepreneurs being able to flourish and then bringing them in later on through regulation. I have a couple questions. One is more just to kind of unpack a little more what your helped kind of illustrate, illuminate for us around understanding Xi Jinping's theories around political economy and social contract, and as it relates to the tech sector. So how much can we attribute, I guess there's this tension between continuity versus break, right? So how much of the policies that we're seeing from President Xi or General Secretary Xi are reflective of a really unique divergent break from previous regimes or previous administrations that is also attributable to him as a person and his views, versus almost a predictable outcome based on this sort of development and growth of China and some of the aspects of that growth that have kind of gone off the rails. So I wonder if you could kind of help us unpack that a little more.
And I'll try to be briefer than I was. I think this is very much Xi Jinping dependent. When the elders picked Xi Jinping really to put the party back in the center of things and get society a little bit more running in lines that it wanted to, they got a lot more than they bargained for. It's very clear that Xi Jinping came in with a vision of what he wanted China to be, and it appeared as it unfolds over this last decade, it's a very comprehensive vision. We first saw him doing the practical things of making the party strong and being everywhere and under as much control as possible. We saw him solidify his own power so that he was able to do the things he wanted. We saw him bring the PLA under his control, the party's control. And we saw him begin to put bring society in line through things like the social credit system and others. So I'm seeing a continuity in his actions in that he's gotten all that done. He's got the influence, and now he's turning his attention to economics and the social contract. And as I say, I think that's a continuity of thought with the other leaders that some have emphasized more than others, and that is eventually finally making that move. I actually was writing an article called Xi Jinping's Great Leap Forward, and it's the idea is that Mao attempted it, tried to do it too quickly. Xi is doing it gradually, but it's very much dependent on him. Another leader might not have had that same vision. Another leader may have continued Deng Xiaoping's policies with a vengeance, and we might even see a more unequal and a society and economy.
The next question is about the tech sector specifically. So, for a long time, the tech sector has been essentially incubated, or aspects of the tech sector have been incubated by China through denial of market access for foreign firms and through the Great Chinese Firewall that helped to really protect and allow a lot of these companies like Alibaba, for instance, to grow without facing the same kinds of foreign competition they would otherwise see. So, and now we're seeing the reverse, or we're seeing the inability of those firms now, or limitations on their ability to grow globally now because of some of the most recent policies. So what role do tech firms ultimately play in the party's vision for the economy? So were they incubated to become global competitors? Or is the party more interested in growing a domestic tech sector for domestic objectives, whether that's for data collection or technology needed to support the hard infrastructure, or hard tech and manufacturing?
Yeah, I think there's the jury is out on that. I have seen a fintech called China's secret weapon, because they actually have the companies have begun to make inroads in Southeast Asia and other places, and the idea is that once the economy becomes dependent on them and a financial system, then they'll have a lot more control. But it seems clear from the way they've developed that a lot of this is very tough to transfer overseas. It doesn't travel as well as it does outside of China. And so it's very tough to say what the actual objectives were with the party, other than to just develop a sector that seemed to be necessary. Don't misunderstand. They're not trying to kill this sector. They're just I've seen some say trying to turn it into more of a utility, so that for foreign investors, the big growth years are over, but it doesn't diminish the importance of being able to pay your bills on the phone or get a loan or any of these things, as long as they're regulated properly. So I see it more, again, without any way of knowing having seen any policy statements on this, that the intent was to let it grow, and if they became international competitors, all the better.
And then I'll ask one last question, and then we want to turn over to the audience Q&A. But so why didn't the tech sector see this coming? You know, what did they miss in how are these policies impact foreign tech firms to investments in China? And then another part of that too, and additional would be, what would you recommend to companies you work with who are either in the tech sector or Chinese tech sector, or considering investing in the tech sector in China?
Make sure I get all of that. Okay, the reason we didn't see it coming is that we look at things. How do investors? I mean, I used to work in an investment bank, and I've been around this world for most of my business career. They look at, they're looking at an industry. Is this industry going to grow? They look at a company. How's the management? What's going on with the, what's the balance sheet look like? When in fact, what they're not realizing is that politics is the economy. And so it's easy if you're just focused on a few aspects in your investment analysis to miss the fact that at any time the government can come in, the party can come in and simply change the entire environment. I actually wrote a chapter in a book about this, on investing in China, and I this is years ago, and I admonished, I said, you've got to be like a Chinese investor. You've got to understand the full context, what I called the whole China elephant, based on the blind man touched the elephant poem or parable. And the idea is that we missed it because we weren't paying attention. Anybody who's been paying attention sees that Xi has been, in fact, engaging in a third revolution in China. It just so happens that nobody in the investment world paid attention until they started losing money. If they paid attention earlier, they might not have been able to say, okay, Ant Financial is going to be the target, or DD is going to be the target, but they would have had a better risk assessment of their overall investments, and it would have been, and might have been better able to protect those sectors, those investments. The impact for anybody working with China, the party is going to be a lot more involved with anybody you're collaborating with or investing in. And I think that is, again, that's a whole different subject, but we're seeing much more party intrusion into the private sector. And people say this is going to kill innovation. Oh my God, what are they doing? Well, what they're doing is they're exercising the role of the party in an economy that is not necessarily capitalist, but the goal is to have an overall control of the economy. So far as investments, I just had somebody come to the other day, another investment firm coming to. They said, "Oh my God, we just made this huge investment in China China agrotech," and they said, "Did we make a huge mistake?" And I said, "Okay, no. As far as I can tell, you didn't. Why? Because." And this has been through my entire career in business or investment in China. If you're aligned with the party's objectives, you've got a pretty good chance of doing well, or at least not running afoul and losing a lot of money. If now, for example, you were to really think, well, I just think we need to really make a huge investment in Ant Financial, which looks like it may relaunch its IPO, you're probably not going to get the returns you're expecting. But but agritech, absolutely. Is that something that would be it's not something you hear about a lot, but I happen to have studied it, and it's a huge priority for the government and the party. And so, yeah, so align yourself with party interests and see where the best opportunities there. And again, start from the political side, and at the very best, start from Xi Jinping's vision, since he seems to be running everything.
Thank you.
Great. And so Spencer, if I may, I'd like to start throwing in some questions coming from our audience. Yeah. Okay, and just a quick comment from one who ran a multinational company in China for 12 years. You're exactly right, Malcolm. I mean, we would look and see what the party, we were in agriculture, so we'd look and see what the party's plans for agriculture were and try to build our business around that. And that was by far the most successful way to go. Okay, I'm going to start with a comment because we have one speaker here who said, Mr. Riddell, I think you got it right on Chinese characteristics. you're the first non-Chinese to get it right in terms of how to interpret China today. So that came from a gentleman who has a Chinese background, I know. So that's
I thank him, and I certainly can't. Bugandang.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so first question might be, and I think you can answer this quickly. How much of Xi's disdain for Deng Xiaoping has affected Xi's policies?
I've read about this. I saw that in George Soros's article. I can't imagine it would have anything particularly to do with it, other than he might be pleased that what he's doing is undoing what Deng Xiaoping did. But if we go back and look at what Deng Xiaoping's objectives were, Deng Xiaoping didn't mean for this to be in place, all these things to be in place forever. It was time at some point to move on to the next stage towards socialism. And that's what, if the theorists at the time who were backfilling what Deng was doing, were making that same statement. I mean, this was not meant to be the permanent condition of China's economy and society. So I don't think it. I think he just decided this is the time to move because he thinks China's strong enough to do it, not because he doesn't like Deng. But goodness knows, how do I know? You saw my little thing flipping his head up. I don't know what's in his head.
Great. Okay, and another question would be, do you think the new focus on common prosperity is going to lead to reform in the hukou system?
That's a tougher one, because one of the problems with the hukou system is how much it costs to provide those social services to everybody. And it's a real question when you get to the smaller cities, the second, third, fourth tier cities. It's hard to tell if they have the wherewithal to do that. If we might see a modified phasing out where the social services are gradually put in. But yeah, I think there's not much question that there's a lot of discussion in China about getting rid of the hukou system. It's a practical problem, I think, not a political one, or not seeing internal immigrants as second-class citizens. It's just a hard thing to do, given the structure of the city government and services.
Okay. Here's a good one. Assuming Xi does believe that it's time to transition from capitalism to socialism, how many Chinese business leaders or other elites do you think agree with this? For those who don't see the march of history the same way, what should they do? And does it really matter if the elites are on board or not?
That's just a fascinating question, because you read so often about all these the study groups where Xi Jinping thought, Marxism, and also Confucianism, and you read about the folks who are catching up on their on their messages on their cell phone and nobody's paying attention. Again, this is nothing I'm ready to stand behind. I think Xi's got a problem. I think that Mao couldn't make the transition because human nature, well, Soviet Union had made the transition. Who's made the transition so far? Human nature just doesn't seem to line up with Marx. As much as I think Marx is a very valuable lens to be examining all sorts of things through, it does kind of posit a different kind of person than certainly the current human nature has. So I don't think people, I can't imagine a lot of people are behind this. I think people want to let the good times roll and keep capitalism going, keep the party out of their companies. Would you want the government to come in and be the chairman of your government, party official, be the chairman of your board?
I like the fact that the party pays for 1% and gets on the board.
That's right. That's great. There's so many aspects to that.
Okay, this one is someone mentioned that you haven't mentioned Taiwan today. So what is Xi Jinping?
Oh boy!
Now that you're looking, at the tea leaves, how does Xi Jinping look at Taiwan?
That is my core issue, and this is going to take a long time. Before I was in the take Xi Jinping seriously, or take Xi Jinping say what he means, I sort of put his saber rattling about Taiwan a little bit aside, but I'm now more inclined to see that he is more intent on reuniting Taiwan with the mainland than any of his predecessors. I'll say this, it's just got to be a short answer. Let me just say, I do not believe, I think invasion is the last resort. Right now, we see all sorts of sort of the political warfare, the misinformation campaigns. There's a possibility of, say, taking an obscure offshore island. I mean, is the U.S. going to go to war over some little spit? They didn't do it in the South China Sea, so I can't see them doing it here. Maybe let's say something dramatic like a blockade. So if he's willing to take the heat for that to get Taiwan back, he's got to say, are the democracies in Japan and Korea and whatever going to go to war because he's got a blockade? Yeah, they may go to war if you invade, if PLA paratroopers are dropping into the center of Taipei. But at what point do you do it? Salami slicing has been his way. Just look at the history of how the South China Sea has gone, how what's happening in India and Bhutan. And you'll see that there's a lot of other steps. But yes, I think I am more and more convinced he is intent within his tenure of getting Taiwan back. And that's a change in my view.
Okay, and that the Taiwan issue has been raised by a couple of our participants.
I'm happy to come back and do a whole session on Taiwan because that's my key issue.
Okay, and again, as the Economist had on their cover, they had it the most dangerous place in the world. So
absolutely agree.
Right. Okay. Let's see. More of a comment, I think, from one of our participants. Common prosperity looks like, the distribution of income, which the U.S. and EU also push for, and the encouraging of manufacturing makes sense. But the commentator says soft tech is all about information, and if the soft tech industry, I guess, gets too strong, then this might challenge the party. So I guess from this viewer's point of view, he says that small firms and hard tech are safe, but soft tech firms, the party is wary.
Oh, I completely agree. It was a matter of time. That's a terrific point. I didn't make it. I had to. If you would have seen my original presentation, I can't even get my arms long enough. I had to cut way down. There's no question that the data issue is a key one, and it's got a couple of aspects. First, the party wants to be in control of that data, but it still wants to collect it. So, but it wants it for its own use. The other thing is that these soft tech, and I'm really not fond of the term, but let's just use it. Soft tech has the potential of creating narratives that are outside of what the party is pitching, and so there's all sorts of issues here with the data and with the power of the companies to use the data for things that are not necessarily in the party's interest, but in the company's interest. It's absolutely crucial, and it just was a matter of time that I didn't put it in. I appreciate the comment. I appreciate the question, the comment about that.
Okay, it's now 5, and if you're okay, Malcolm, we'll go about 10 minutes over.
Absolutely.
Okay, there are more questions coming in. Someone's asked about the rogue capture of ARM China. I don't know if you can explain that without going into too much detail. And you mentioned there's a long, slow brain drain of Taiwan's semiconductor talent moving to the mainland for the semiconductor industry. So I don't know if you want to comment on
what is the first one? The rogue?
The rogue capture of ARM China. ARM. ARM, it's a Chinese branch of, I think it's a British company that basically
I'm sorry. I was hearing different. I haven't followed that. So probably one of the reasons I didn't recognize it immediately. The brain drain from Taiwan is of course in Taiwan. They're doing everything they can to stop this, but it's when we look at China as this unstoppable force, one of the things I always look at is how after all these years and all these billions of dollars, China can't compete in semiconductors. They can't make a state-of-the-art semiconductor. Now, I'm not a tech person. That's why when I took this subject on, when we talked, I made it clear that I can't talk about anything technical. But I follow semiconductors enough just to always be amazed that they're not able to do it. Now they're trying to get out the Taiwan techs to do it. and the amount of money that's been wasted in the semiconductor, it's just the waste in the investments in semiconductors is breathtaking. Again, another long subject. But yeah, it's definitely an issue that it concerns the Taiwan government. But will it be effective? I'm just not getting this good vibe about semiconductors in China. I mean, it might turn around in 5 years, but there's just nothing on the horizon that I see that makes me think China is going to be able to solve that problem anytime soon, even with a lot of Taiwanese help.
Thank you. We have had a question from one participant just saying, is this session recorded so that they can see it again? And yes, the answer is yes. And we've put up the link. It's also go to our website and you'll see our YouTube channel there, and you can see it again. Bob Cap comes into the question and says, Malcolm, how can a one-man rule cult of personality end well? Sooner or later, Xi will be gone, and then what will follow? This is a big picture one.
It's a really big picture, and I think, and Bob, I think about that a lot. It sort of depends on how well he sets the direction. I mean, if we look at Deng Xiaoping, he set a direction for China that sort of stayed in place for quite a while, and then somebody came in with the idea that it was going to be different. I think a lot of it depends on how first of all, for the earlier question, how widely accepted. I mean, it was when capitalism started to work. There weren't a lot of people except some really strong leftists who thought that this whole using capitalist tools to make China prosperous was a real bad idea. Oh, especially the people who were getting rich or coming out of poverty or able to feed and clothe their family a lot better. So I think a lot of it depends on the success of the policies. I mean, is Xi Jinping thought and action really, has he gone too far? And I can't get this out of my head, the nagging idea that he's just gone too far, and this is not going to necessarily end well, and that maybe there'll be a correction with the next leader. But so a lot can happen between, I hope he's a young guy, he's younger than I am, so a little bit, and so I hope he lives a long time. We all do, but it just depends on how successful these things are. I'm just not getting a good feel that they're going to be successful. And I just to put on another thing, I think the Chinese people got used to having a little more, just a little more freedom than they had, and I don't know how much more they're going to be restricted as the party comes in more. So far, it seems that folks are accepting the social credit system pretty well because it solves a lot of practical problems. But as there's more and more intrusion, as there appears to be possibly more and more intrusion, I just wonder if these more cosmopolitan and aware citizens are going to accept an awful lot of what's happening. I see all kinds of issues ahead, Bob, on this. And a lot of it depends on whether or not she takes it so far that people just are ready for something different when he's gone. Or he loses power in between because he does something really dumb.
I just want to make a comment. And do you see the big elimination of poverty campaign? Was that kind of preparation for common prosperity? You think?
Yeah, as I say, I think he's taken things step by step.
Right.
But the amazing thing, again, another big subject. If you look at this, the standard for poverty was an old standard. And so how many of those people, there's a lot of analyses written about this and more than I can explain in just a couple of minutes. But if you really look at it, you really didn't bring that many people out of poverty as we define it today, which again, begs the question of how successful his policies really are. But it definitely was preparation. It was definitely I see it as preparation. I see Xi as being very careful and systematic in what he does. Even when he screws up, he still goes back and tries to do it the right way, what he considers the right way.
Okay. I think this question may be the last because I suspect you'll have a fairly long answer for this one. And this is one that I think we're all struggling with now. And actually, it comes from a gentleman who worked, I think, at USTR. the economic model that she's following, i.e. state-led development, industrial policies, lots of subsidies, et cetera, is largely incompatible with WTO principles and our free market kind of economy. So how should the US respond? I mean, the tariffs didn't work. So what should we do about this? I mean, the subsidies for semiconductors, example, are enormous. How do we compete against these things?
Well, again, I try to keep my inner hawk at bay when I speak at anything, but we're going to have to pull my inner hawk out, I'm afraid. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Call coming in. The first of all is, I think it's Biden's on the right track in two ways, and again, how well that's going to work out now is a question. But you've got to bring folks on and get them riled up about China's not complying with WTO as it stands, and then you've got to get into the WTO and you've got to strengthen the rules that are more compatible with a new kind of, I guess we'll call it state capitalism that China has. Until then, I mean, I wrote somewhere, all these things that Xi does, takes the South China Sea, threatens Taiwan, flaunts WTO. What price has he paid for any of this? I mean, he does, so make him pay a price. But we can't do it alone. Tariffs aren't the answer. But the big problem is we don't have a lot of levers because she doesn't seem to care about a lot of care as much about world opinion as he did. And he definitely doesn't care a whole lot about following the rules if it's to China's benefit. So I think we've got a real problem with that. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question? I get so riled up.
Well, it's basically how should the U.S. respond to that?
And the other thing is, for a long time we were all wringing our hands about when we finally all became China hawks in government. You couldn't possibly be dovish now or get thrown out. That was all great, but I've said for a long time that infrastructure, all these sorts of things that Biden is doing, supporting R&D. Bill Reich at the CSIS, has said, and this is a common thing, when you're running a race, you can either run faster or you can trip the other guy. We've tried tripping the other guy, and we don't seem to be too successful at it. And frankly, I don't see where the really strong tools are to do it. So we've got to run faster. And way before Trump even, I've been lamenting that we're not doing enough to work on these issues at our home to make us more competitive. Just a real quick issue on industrial policy. Industrial policy, China style, is not what we need. But we've had industrial policy of one kind or another since Jefferson was president. So it's a matter of pulling together the resources and guiding them in the right way, the way that we did with, say, the going to the moon and things like that. So we've got to pull ourselves together a little bit. So I'm more for out competing right now, not because I wouldn't love to trip them, but I can't see a way to do it.
Great. And with that, I think we are coming up to what I mentioned as our hard stop. There are a couple of questions that we weren't able to pose to Malcolm.
Let me type in my email address if anybody wants to continue this, or if anybody would like to get the China Macro Reporter, where they can get more of what I think than they ever wanted to hear. Just write me. It's free, and so I'm happy to put it out.
I'll actually, Malcolm, I'll put in a plug for that. How often you do it? Once a week or twice?
Twice a week.
Twice a week.
And there are more things coming out. Yeah.
Right, and I read it twice a week. And one of the reasons we invited Malcolm on today is I read his comments and said, gee, this guy seems to understand what's going on much better than any other of the other observers or pundits. So I encourage people to read it if you're interested in what's going on in China.
Yeah, just shoot me a note and I'll add you to the subscription. If you don't like it, unsubscribe.
Right, okay. Yeah, so did you just
I put my email address in. Yeah, just do it that way. It's easier than going to the subscribe form and all. Well, you can take a look at some of it. We're still the website, the new improved website hasn't launched, but you can get a feel for it at ChinaDebate.com. There's more to
Great.
come
Yeah,
on that.
we're not seeing the email address in the chat box.
Right, it's to Alistair. Sorry, it should be to
There
everybody.
it goes. Okay, okay.
go-
Mon put it in.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm sorry. I
Mon
saw I was responding. I had a direct message.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah. Okay, now it's gone out to everyone. So you can
And,
see.
and he gets the China debate in too?
This is Riddell saying.
Yeah, let me put China debate into everybody. Let me see how I do this here
Just-
to everyone. Yeah, and again, this is not launched yet. It's in a severe beta form, but you can see an awful lot of the curated stuff and my own stuff in there. There we go. Oop, no, it should have been,
No,
sorry.
it's not going to everyone. Yeah.
It's not going to everyone. I've got it going to everyone. Let me see here. I got it. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. Okay, here we go again. Let me try it again. Bingo. And I would love to discuss these issues or any others with everyone. And mostly anybody who disagrees with me, I want to hear about even more. That's how we all figure out what we're thinking about things.
Great. Okay, and with that, we're going to sign off. Again, I want to thank Spencer for moderating, pulling together some great questions, and thanks to all the participants. I found this to be a great session, and I hope other folks do. There's been a couple comments in the chat box where people have said this is quite good. So
Will we save the chats? I didn't get to read them. I'd love to.
okay, I think we can get those.
Yeah,
I think we can
great.
get those to you. Right.
Thank you all so much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed this session.
Great. Okay, thanks everyone, and we're going to close.